Ser and Estar are both verbs that mean to be. We already know the conjugations for each. We're going to learn when to use each one. You're going to become familiar with some of the verbs using certain words. And it'll hopefully start making more sense as to why we use said with adjectives and such that we learned in Chapter 1, and why estar we used more with present progressive, which we just finished this chapter. And we'll see the location as well. Okay. If we don't remember, ser and estar are both, in English, I am, you are, he, she is, we are, they are, except for they're used for different purposes. And so we're going to go through each one. For now, just listen, then we'll jot them down. We should already know the conjugated form of ser. Soy, eres, es, somos, son. You should already know the conjugated form of estar. Estoy, estás, está, estamos, están. Very clear accents on those A's. Okay. So we have to start choosing when to use one versus when to use the other, since they both mean to be. What is estar in the present tense? Conjugations, we just went over. Estoy, estás, estamos, están. Make sure your accents very, very clear. I cannot emphasize that enough. It can change the whole entire meaning of a word, and it does in this case. The word está with an accent at the end and an emphasis at the end means you, formal, he or she, where somebody singular is. Está is without the accent, that would mean this. So two very separate words. So we know the conjugations. Let's start seeing why we use it. How do we ask somebody how they're doing? ¿Cómo estás? What verb did you just use? Estás. Okay, which comes from a verb estar. That's what we learned that from the beginning. So anytime you're asking somebody how they feel, it's always going to be estar. Okay. Notice with your vocab, you're going to get your vocab and it'll have the word for sick, which is enfermo, which we'll always have to have using with the verb estar. That's how you feel. And we'll see the difference between a condition and emotion. But also for temporary physical conditions, for example, if you are sick, technically that is more of a temporary thing, although I do realize that some illnesses are lifelong illnesses that some people have. And so just know if it's an illness, usually we're talking about something to do with the verb estar. So being sick, a door being closed is a temporary condition, somebody being tired. We go under the assumption that somebody being tired isn't going to be forever tired. It's going to be just a temporary thing. Okay, and window being open can always be closed. Okay, and location is the other big one. So I am in science class. Another word that we're going to see here a lot with the verb to be. Estar is going to be the en, because that tells you a location of where you are. Okay. Now, we can also, we're going to get to this in just a second, if you just see Spain, you can say technically two things about Spain. I'm from Spain, I'm in Spain. The difference is, location will always be estar. Does anybody remember how to ask somebody where they're from? De donde eres? So we use the verb ser for for origin. We use estar for location. Okay, we're about to take some notes in a few minutes. I have acronyms to help you remember these reasons for estar. Position and location are very similar. So talking about where something or you are. Anytime it's an action in progress, we use the ing, which we use present progressive. So you always have to use estar with the ing form of a verb. So that'll always be a clue, seeing that ando or iendo in Spanish. Condition and emotion, very similar as well. When you ask somebody how they're doing, it can be a condition like being sick or tired versus an emotion being happy or sad. Okay. I like to use the smaller acronym because it kind of position and location are the same, and condition and emotion are kind of the same. Is something being more temporary. I don't want you to always think in permanent temporary terms. For example, right now it's 9:58. Is it going to be 9:59 very soon? Okay. Is time temporary? However, what did we use with time when we did tell time? Es la or son la. So time is a temporary thing, but one of the reasons why we use, or one of the reasons for said is date and time. So we'll get to that in just a second. Any other location words, which these will be in your notes as well. Something that tells you that you're in, on, or at, or these right here will always be a clue that you're going to use the verb estar. Okay. So another example here, I am in science class. I am a little bit sad, so that's an emotion. Soup is cold, that's a condition. And he is in Santiago, that's a location, being from, we're going to get to in just a minute. Okay. Then ser, we should know, soy, eres, es, somos, son. And this is one of the acronyms this exercise uses, but I don't like this one, so I'm going to show you two other ones. I'm going to give you all I've got, and then you choose which one you want. Okay. The first P for possession. Well, we just did possession on the test that we just checked, this last chapter. When we use possession, if we wanted to say it is Miguel's pencil, okay, or in this case, you can look at the example here. The book is Miguel's. It's Miguel's book. So we gotta get rid of that apostrophe s by using the word de. That'll always be a clue for ser. What does that mean? Of or from. Of, in this case, talking about possession. From, talking about origin, which will always be a clue for said as well. So, but look here, the word for is going to be the said word. Okay. Occupation or profession is always going to be said. I know anybody can change their profession at any time, but it's considered more of a permanent characteristic. Okay. Origin or nationality, like we just said, de donde eres, asking where somebody's from. That's always using the verb ser. It is considered more permanent. Again, I don't want you to always think in permanent temporary terms, though. In this case, look at the examples. He is from Cuba, origin, versus something being made out of something. That's also kind of the origin. What is the shirt made out of, or what is it originally made with? Okay. The P, personal characteristics. Basically, if you're describing anybody, if you're using an adjective, it's most likely going to be said if you're talking about their personality. Okay, so if you look at your chapter 1 words, you have a lot of adjectives, which are description, but you'll see when we start working with these in Spanish how it can technically be one or the other. Time or date. How do we tell time? What do we always start with? Es la or son las. So that's one of the, even though said is more permanent, you can't always say permanent temporary is the difference between the two verbs. You always got to come back and look at why each one is used and when to use each one. And for date, we always do, does anybody remember how to ask what the date is? That's how we answered it. So, ¿cuál es la fecha de hoy? Hoy es el whatever day of the month. So, we use the verb said there again. So, I put permanent again in parentheses because time and date obviously change fairly often, but time and date are one of the reasons for said. So, you just got to use said with it. Okay. Here's one that I like to use better than that acronym. COP, cop, offer. Said. Get it? Get it? Okay, good, good. So, C for characteristic, O for origin or occupation, whichever one, P for permanence or possession. So things that are more permanent, although you can't always use the permanent as a reason, always think back as to a more specific reason. So I added this to your notes, which we'll look at in just a second. Here's another one that a student made up a couple of years ago, uses more of your reasons. Obviously, the COP here doesn't use all your reasons. It's just the ones that are used most often. Here, you have more specifically, but of course, it's more things to remember. So, I gave you different ones to pick from. Whichever one works for you is the one you go with so that you remember when to use ser. Okay. All right. It's Juan's book. Basically, the book is of Juan. So anything to do with possession will always be ser. Occupation will always be ser. Origin, this one says, I am from another planet. So wherever you are from, then it would always be ser because that's talking about origin. Any adjective will usually be ser. I'm going to show you some examples where it can be estar, and when it becomes more of a temporary thing as opposed to a personal characteristic that is part of your personality or part of the way that you usually look. Somebody being tall, they're not going to all of a sudden become short. They're going to be tall for and same thing with the other way. Somebody being short, yes, people can grow, but then you reach a certain level in life where you don't really grow anymore. So that's why it's considered more of a permanent thing. But remember, time and date aren't really always permanent. So also using your name, another way that you can say your name is yo soy Maria, I am Pablo. You can use that with ser as well. Here is where things can get tricky. I'm going to try to take all the tricky things that can be one verb or the other out of your quizzes and tests. If it's one where technically both answers could fit in there with both reasons that we've gone over, we're going to discuss those in class, but we're not going to have them on a quiz or on a test. For example, if we're talking about is the dance in the university, you're asking about a location of something, but you're using the verb ser here. No, it's in the Hotel Palacio. Normally when you use en, you're talking about location. In this case, you're talking about where something takes place, where an event takes place. So for the most part, en is going to be a clue for estar, but know that when an event takes place, you're saying a fact, and fact is one of those other reasons for estar. Okay? So we're going to take all the tricky ones out. Adjectives, same thing. Sometimes you can have adjectives with either verb. Let me show you a couple of examples here. The professor is bored. That would be a condition. He's bored right now, but he won't always be bored. But if he is boring, then that's part of his personality. That's just who he is. That's like saying somebody is tall or short. Okay. So notice the two different verbs here are being used with a condition. Something that he's bored, something that'll change is estar. Something that's more permanent, part of the personality would be ser. Okay. Normally when you're talking about a characteristic or a personality trait of somebody, you're going to use ser. If you're talking about a state or condition, you're going to use estar. So soup being cold, yes, I know the soup was at one time hot and now it's cold. That's more of a condition versus the elephants are big. They're always going to be big. Which is more permanent and a characteristic. All right. What is ¿Cómo estás? How are you? Okay. So if you're asking how somebody is doing, you're always going to use estar. Okay. Even though how they're doing can change very, very quickly. I'm sorry. The condition or how you're feeling, because it can change very quickly, will always be estar. All right, look at these examples again. If something is taking place somewhere, that's the tricky one that you're going to use ser, but origin will always be ser. Location will always be estar. A fact, for example, Brasilia is the capital of Brazil. That is a something that will not change. So we're not talking about location. Just because you see the name of a country doesn't mean you're talking where somebody's from or talking about a location. You could be talking about a fact, which you'll use the verb ser. So there's a couple of just refreshing ser. You can use with names, characteristics, time, date, origin, nationality, professions. Estar is usually with more temporary things like being sick would be a condition, being tired would be a condition. Location is a big use for estar, and more of those temporary emotions. Okay. All right, tell me what number one would be. If I want to say he is bored, would it be es or está? Give me reasons. If he's bored, it's more of a temporary condition. So that would be está, which would be B. Okay, what about the second one? He is boring. Let's try some of these. What is origin? Which verb?
Ser.
Good. How about how you feel? Good. What about personal characteristics? Good. Time and date? Where you are, a location. Good. Possession? Good. Occupation? Good. Where an event takes place? Where it takes place is said, and location would be estar. So again, we're going to take the tricky ones out and try to make them less tricky. Whenever it's a fact, then we usually deal with said. Okay. Normally, when you're talking about where, it is location talking about estar, but again, we'll take the tricky ones out. All right, let's try some of these in Spanish. We're going to try on your notes. We're going to do English sentences. So I'll translate these for you. The name of your friend is Pancho. So if we're talking about a name here, which verb would it be? Ser. So which conjugation of ser would it be on the blank? Es. Good. What about Pancho is from Paris? The de will always tell you origin, which is a clue for what verb? Said. Which form of said goes in the blank? Es. Okay. What about he is, and this is a profession. So if we're talking about somebody's job or occupation, this would always be said, which is es again, all singular forms there. Okay. A location of somebody. Your dad is in, and that's the name of a place. Proper noun. Okay. That will be estar. Which conjugation of estar? Está, with a very clear accent. Good. What if you're talking about somebody being tall and not very handsome? Said, because you're talking about a characteristic. So es again. What about if it's a temporary condition of being busy and happy? Está. Good. What about a date? You have to always use, with dates and time, you have to always use es. Now for this one, when you're talking about time, how do we decide on time what we put in the blank, since there's no subject per se? We did es la or son las based on what?
If it's past one, then it's es la.
Right, exactly. So if it's singular, it's es. If it's plural, it's son. So in this case, what would it be? Son, because it's three. Three is more than one. Plural. Plural time. Always using the verb said. All right, let's try some in Spanish this way. Diego is from Madrid, but is studying in Salamanca. If he is from somewhere, it would be es, because that's origin. If he is studying, that should be a clue for what? Because it's present progressive, what we just did from the last chapter. He is from a place, that's origin, so that's said. But he's studying, which would be present progressive, which is estar, which is usually a temporary thing. 2, the boss is furious because his assistant is very disorganized. Now, sorry, I forgot a very key word at the end there. Does anybody remember hoy? Today. So today he's very disorganized.
Oh, they'll both be estar.
So he's furious, condition, and he is disorganized today. That would also be condition because it's just today. Now, technically, I put the S there as an option because if you're talking about somebody being disorganized as part of their personality, then it could be S. But today makes it for sure a temporary thing, which can change the sentence.
I thought porque was why.
Porque together is why, porque separately is because. In this case, they have it without the accent here. All right, concert is going to be tomorrow. What are we talking about when we say tomorrow? Time. So what do we always use with time? Ser. Ser, always with time. The musicians are going to be Peruvian. So if we're talking about something from Peru, that would be son. Good. Okay. All right. You are going to have to start filling these in the blank. We're going to do just English today when we do your notes. But when we switch to Spanish, this is what you're going to be faced with. You're going to have a blank. You're going to have to figure out what do you put in the blank and why. So, I am a student. Which verb and why? What is the reason for using either verb?
Well, you're temporarily a student, right?
True. Is it describing something about you being technically a student here is, could be a description, could also be your occupation. Right now your occupation is to be a student. So it would be said, although I do understand that being a student is temporary, although I was in school for an extra 10 years after high school. So it can be a permanent thing forever. But in this case, you're soy. So the yo form of soy is what agrees there. What about 2? She is in the bathroom. Está, because you're talking about location. The en gives you a clue there. Good. What about 3? We are not from Cuba. I don't care if you are or if you're not. What are we talking about? Origin. So that would be ser, which conjugation of ser that agrees with nosotras? Somos. Okay, so that's number 3 there. All right, number 4, you are a doctor. Occupation, ser, which form of ser? Eres. Eres. Good. And last one, she is not dumb. Characteristic. So that would be also a description of somebody. So any characteristic or description will always be the verb ser. Question so far? All right, couple more. Actually, let's go ahead and open up from Edmodo your notes. It's going to be your fill-in-the-blank notes. And let's look at that document.